Bill Anderson. I'm the current president of the Contra Costa County Bar Association. We appreciate your attendance today. We hope that you enjoyed the events already and that you'll continue to be with us. I'd like to first mention our event sponsors who will do so much to make this event possible by name: Certified Reporting Services, Clio, Fine Law, the Firstner Group, JFKU College of Law, Mitchell & Mitchell Insurance Agency, Provident Credit Union, Thomas Reuters, and the Antique Group. Also, our event patrons are ADR Services and Judicial West. We also have our event benefactor, who is Jams, and I would now like to ask Heather Muirhead if she could come forward and speak to us briefly about Jams.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much to the Contra Costa County Bar Association for hosting this great event and for including Jams. It's such an honor to be here with you. I especially want to thank Ann Wolf for walking us through all the details leading up to the event. Thank you, Ann. Jams has been the primary sponsor of the MCLE Spectacular for years, and we value our role in the legal community and appreciate this opportunity to partner with the Bar Association. I'm new to this community and super excited to be a part of it. I'm really impressed with the quality of the attorneys who belong to this Bar Association and with the level of engagement at events like this. Please know we at Jams always welcome any insights you can provide that will help us serve the legal community. Thank you so much.
Keynote speaker today, Congressman Swalwell, our U.S. representative from the California 15th District. Congressman Swalwell is the oldest of 4 boys and the son of Eric Sr., a retired police officer, and Vicki, who works as an administrative assistant. He was raised in the East Bay and he attended public schools here. He obtained an A Division I soccer scholarship and was the first person in his family to go to college. During college, he worked as an unpaid intern in the office of his representative, Congressman Ellen Thatcher. After earning his undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Maryland, Congressman Swalwell returned to the East Bay to serve as a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. He served there for 7 years. He also served as the chairman of the Dublin Heritage and Cultural Arts Commission, on the Dublin Planning Commission, and was elected to the Dublin City Council. In 2012, Eric Swalwell was elected to represent California's 15th Congressional District, which includes a large part of the East Bay. Now in his 3rd term, he's working hard to bring new energy, ideas, and a problem-solving spirit to Congress, with a focus on advancing policies that support equality, opportunity, and security. Congressman Swalwell serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and believes that protecting Americans is Congress' most solemn duty. He is a top Democrat on the subcommittee on the Central Intelligence Agency and is responsible for oversight, policy, activities, and budget of the CIA. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee. In keeping with his promise to work across the aisle, in his 1st term, Congressman Swalwell co-founded the bipartisan United Solutions Caucus to bring new members together. The group meets regularly to advance common sense solutions and overcome the partisan divide. While addressing national and international issues, Congressman Swalwell remains rooted in the region that he represents. He flies home almost every weekend and has been a leader in adopting social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. as well as technology like Skype, to stay in constant contact with his constituents. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Swalwell.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you to the Contra Costa Bar Association for inviting me here today and helping me myself get some needed CLE credits. Also wanted to thank each and every one of you for what you do to advance the cause of justice and access to the courts in our communities. It's as important today as ever. And part of what I wanted to talk to you about today is access. We're in a moment right now in our country where we are having long overdue conversations about harassment at the workplace, equality and fairness in our communities, which was recently illustrated by what happened in Charlottesville. And it's really my belief that so many of the policies that are out there that hold people back, or the actions that so many people take, are reflected by who's sitting at the leadership tables in our country. And if a police department is completely made up of Caucasian police officers in a predominantly African American community, I think it's not to be surprising when you have inherently biased policies, intentional or unintentional, taking place in the community. If you have only white males, or just only any type of male running a company, it shouldn't be surprising if there is rampant sexual harassment taking place in the workforce. And I think what we all can do is to try and step back and think about how we promote inclusiveness and diversity in our own families, in our own communities, and at our own workplaces. And I think if we strive to make sure that our communities and our workplaces look like the rest of America and what our communities truly are, that is one important step to reducing inequality and harassment that takes place. Now, something that is occurring in our profession that I very much fear threatens this is the cost of access. It costs too damn much to get a legal education today. And if you're lucky enough to get one, most people will find themselves in financial quicksand for most of their working lives. And if that is the case, when you look at which communities have the best schools and which communities have the jobs, we are going to perpetuate a lack of diversity, a lack of women being able to enter our workforce. I was the first in my family to go to college, most simply because my dad told me over and over that's why he and my mom worked so hard, because they wanted me to do something that they had never been able to do. And I saw the struggles of how hard they worked, how much they sacrificed, and what they expected of me and my brothers. But I also saw the toll that going to college and going to law school took on all of us as a family. And I saw that it was truly a family affair, that I was working a full-time job in law school, taking full-time courses, and that still wasn't even close to being able to cover the costs. And I'll never forget that when I finished my bar prep course and took the bar exam, came out of that hibernation that so many of you know so well in the months leading up to the bar exam, I told my mom, I said, "Mom, we did it. Your dream was for me to go to college. I actually went on to law school. I just took the bar exam. We did it." And I said to her, "Why don't you and Dad, you guys should take a vacation. You guys have earned it." Because I never saw them raising me and my three younger brothers ever take a vacation. And she looked at me and she had a tear in her eye and she said, "Honey, there's not going to be a vacation." She said, "To get you through that last semester and the barbering course that you took, I had to take out a payday loan." She said, "Those payday loans have pretty high interest payback rates." She said, "There's no vacation, but we have the satisfaction and fulfillment that you will now be able to go and do good and better than we were." And I think, again, that's the center of the American dream, wanting your kids to do better, but I'm afraid that the cost of going to law school today, how little we pay those who work and serve the public with their law degrees, and how little we do to make it easier to pay off student loan debt is going to affect the profession. Yesterday, we had a vote in the House of Representatives, first time in 31 years, to change the tax code. It is too complicated. I don't think it helps enough working families, but I voted against it. One of the main reasons I voted against it was it eliminated the student loan interest deduction, which 12 million people took last year. And while for a lot of people that deduction doesn't mean much, for those who are taking it, it makes, as one young recent graduate told me, the difference between being able to turn on the heat in the winter or trying to collect all the blankets she can to stay warm. These dollars make a difference for young people to start a family, save to buy a home, and if they're enterprising enough, to go out and start their own business. So I hope we continue to think about what we can do to increase access to the profession so that every community, regardless of where you're from, that if you want to go and serve and help and lift somebody else up, that you have a pathway to being able to do it. But I also came here to talk to you about a recent attack that our country saw in the last presidential election. And it wasn't an attack in the conventional sense, in that a bomb was dropped or a shot was fired. We saw in the last election a foreign adversary was able to undermine something that we value so dearly in this country: the freedom to choose. Now, democracy in America is messy enough, as we have seen in time and time again in presidential election again. I'm the only Democrat in a family where my mom and dad they have Donald Trump magnets on their refrigerator. My wife is from Indiana. I'll see her parents tomorrow when we fly out there, and I know what I'm in for when I get there. But our democracy is messy enough without an adversary interfering. And so I wanted to walk you through just so far what we know as far as who was responsible, who we suspect may have worked and assisted the Russians, and most importantly, what we can do about it as our nation's leaders to make sure that it's a little less messy next time that we go to the polls, and however messy it is, that it's always our mess and doesn't belong to anyone else. So we know that in 2015 and 2016, the Russian government had a preferred candidate to be president of the United States. Our intelligence community has assessed that Vladimir Putin, out of an absolute distaste for Secretary Clinton, that arose mostly from what he ascribed to be her role in the color revolutions that were taking place all over the globe, and her speaking out about human rights conditions in Russia and across the world, really did not like Secretary Clinton. He had a very favorable view of one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump, somebody who had done business in Russia, had been in Russia in 2013 for a pageant contest, somebody who spoke openly about admiring Vladimir Putin, and so they had a preferred candidate. But what they did next, because every country, when they think of their own interests, has a right to look at another country's elections and have a preferred candidate. But what they did next was rather unprecedented in how free democracies treat each other. And actually, we being a free democracy and Russia being an authoritative autocracy government. So Russia ordered a multifaceted electronic interference campaign against the United States. And it played out in this form. They were able to first create hundreds, if not thousands, of social media accounts on the platforms that we use most. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and they call them trolls or bots. They're fake accounts. And what they did, they were able to perpetuate their preferred candidate, Donald Trump, and tear down the candidate that they didn't like. And so they would post stories. We've seen these in our committee now about Hillary Clinton's health, saying that she was sick or that she had health conditions. And they would put up pro-Trump postings as well. Those are the more obvious ones. The ones that were more disgusting were the thousands of posts that they put up to really stoke racial animosity in our country. They created a Facebook group called Black Matters US, which sounds a lot like Black Lives Matter. And through that group and through thousands of posts that hundreds of millions of people saw on their social media feed, they were pitting African Americans and Caucasians against each other. Just as they were posting something to stoke the fears of African Americans, they were also posting pro-Confederate flag and pro-white supremacist postings. Their interest was to sow discord in our country, we believe, but also, as I said, to use and weaponize platforms that so many of us go to for our news and our social engagements. But I think the worst thing that they did was actually a crime, which was the hacking of emails. We know that there were the hacking of Democratic emails and the hacking of John Podesta's emails. And then they used what we call cutouts to disseminate those emails. One of the cutouts was WikiLeaks. Another one of the cutouts was a group called Lucifer 2.0. What was so brilliant about hacking these emails was that almost none of you, I don't think, would be able to recall anything in those emails that was particularly illegal or illicit. It was really just the inside campaign parlance that would take place in any campaign. But just the mere fact that you had hacking suggested that there was something nefarious behind what was found. And so, again, weaponizing our greatest, I think, strength in this country, freedom of speech, they were able to disseminate through these fake accounts they had created and put out all of these hacked emails. Now, they were creating fake accounts that over 120 million people viewed. They were hacking and disseminating emails. And then they had a couple stations called Russia Today, RT, Sputnik, and a few other Russia broadcasting services who also have social media accounts and viewers in the US. And they would, again, use kind of the feedback loop to perpetuate pro-Donald Trump propaganda and anti-Hillary Clinton materials. We were stunned in our investigation to find, and the intelligence community assessed, that Russia Today had more views inside the United States on their YouTube page than CNN, than Fox News, and MSNBC. They knew what they were doing, and they knew who they were targeting. And I'll submit to you that we'll never know how many minds that they changed, if they changed a single mind at all. It's still unclear how far into our voting registration systems they went. We know that they were able to penetrate 21 voter registration systems with what we call scans, that they were looking at the information inside. We don't believe that they were able to change any vote tallies, although it's still unclear. Just a couple of weeks ago, we learned that they also were using Pokemon Go, for crying out loud. So we're still, I think, a little bit behind just how much they were able to do. But I think what's most offensive and what should cause concern for all of us is that they wanted to change our minds. They wanted to have a say. And regardless if they change a single vote, they have divided our country today. So that was the campaign. It was months and months of hacked emails, fake accounts, broadcasting systems. And by the way, RT and Sputnik, our intelligence community assesses they are connected to Russia's intelligence service, the same one that was carrying out the attack. So we know that this was orchestrated and dictated by Russia's president. Again, preferred candidate they didn't want to see elected. So what do we know about the president, his family, his businesses, and his campaign? I think the evidence so far has borne out that there was a deep willingness and eagerness to work and receive the aid of the Russians, but it's still unclear just what did that working relationship amount to. We still find nearly every single day new pieces of evidence, new prior contacts that were not disclosed, that we're trying to understand. Now, the way that we're trying to understand all of this is through an investigation in the House Intelligence Committee, where we're seeking to first understand how we were attacked, what the vulnerability was, who was responsible, whether any U.S. persons worked with the Russians, and what we can do in the next election to make sure that it never happens again. So I just laid out for you how we were attacked. When it comes to who was responsible, it's pretty clear we've assessed that the Russian government ordered it. On the U.S. person question, we can tell you this, and most of this has not been disputed. Over the past few decades, people from the president to his son to his family members have had long-standing personal, political, and financial ties with Russians. Now, I want to first say, there is nothing illegal on its face about that. Business persons in the United States have business ties all over the globe. What is concerning about that, and what should make anyone skeptical, is that this is a country that is a foreign adversary. It's a country that does not, and has not, even from the Cold War or even today, had our best interests at mind. So whenever, particularly a presidential campaign would draw itself so close to a foreign adversary, it's, I think, at the very least, cause for concern and more probing. So we know that over the past decades, Donald Trump sought to receive about a half dozen trademarks in Russia. He tried to peddle Trump vodka in Russia. They were heavily invested in him in the United States. Just yesterday in the investigation, it was reported that over half of the condos in Trump Tower, a realtor said, were being sold to Russians. Donald Trump's residence in West Palm Beach, Florida, bought for $40 million in 2004, was sold in 2008 to a Russian oligarch for $98 million. Again, on its face, nothing illegal about that. However, 2008 was the real estate market crash. We looked at the zip codes surrounding that sale. That was a 129% profit increase. Nobody saw anywhere close to that over a 4-year time as far as an increase in real estate values. This is important because our intelligence community has assessed that one method that the Russians use if they want to draw somebody close or to compromise them is to prey on financial distress. That financial distress is a way that a person could feel a loyalty to them. Now, I want to be clear that I don't think you'll ever see a piece of evidence that says that Donald Trump or anyone on his team signed some sort of loyalty oath or told the Russian government, we're going to assist you or we're going to be always in your favor. The way that intelligence recruiting works is that you just want them to like you. You want them to make decisions that are in their interest, or as much in their interest as in your own interest. So, as a former prosecutor, I've approached this investigation trying to decide if all of these contacts that we found were innocent explanations or coincidence, or were they a convergence of the personal, political, and financial ties that existed over decades. So let me, I guess, use an example I would use for every closing argument that I would give as a prosecutor. I try and approach this evidence the way that a jury would look at it if they were deciding on a homicide case, in a complicated set of facts. A defense attorney throughout cross-examination could poll each witness or each document and test it and bend it and maybe pull out here and there a coincidence or an innocent explanation. So I would describe it to the jury as, I would use oftentimes, a bundle of sticks. I would take a bundle of sticks and I'd put it in front of the jury. And I would say, this was the eyewitness, and you could bend it and you could, test his statement to you, and if you took this stick alone and broke it over your knee, yeah, it would break. I would go through this. This is the video camera, and this was the bank records, and this was the chat logs. And you could pull them apart and have an innocent explanation for everything, and yeah, it would break. But if you bundle all of these sticks together, tie them up, and try and break them over your knee, are they unbreakable? And I think what we found here is that you could say that there's an innocent explanation for General Michael Flynn in 2015 to go over to Russia, sit next to Vladimir Putin, to be paid $30,000 by Russia Today, who I mentioned was a part of this interference campaign, not to report it to our own government, carry out a relationship throughout the campaign with Russia's ambassador, and then the day that President Obama put sanctions on Russia for what they did during the election, that he would call the ambassador and say, don't worry about the sanctions, intimating that they're going to go away, as has been reported, and then lie about it, of course, when confronted by the vice president, who went on national TV and said none of that ever happened. You could say that there's an innocent explanation for all of that. But when you put together the multiplicity of individuals who, during a presidential campaign, were meeting with Russians, traveling to Russia, traveling to a foreign land like London and Italy to meet with Russia's intelligence services, pretty soon the innocent explanations become that convergence. One person has already pled guilty when he was confronted by the FBI in January of this year. His name is George Papadopoulos. They said to him, you had some communications and travel to Russia during the campaign. He lied, denied it. They came back to him in February. A month later, he lied and denied it. This was in the stipulation of facts that was released by Bob Mueller a couple of weeks ago. Finally, they got his Facebook logs and his Skype chats and pulled him off a plane in July. It takes time to subpoena these records, get the production of documents, be able to confront the witness with the full body of evidence. And he found religion. These guys had guns and badges. It took him 3 times. And when they interviewed him the 3rd time, he said that he joined the Trump campaign as a senior foreign policy advisor, sat in a meeting between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions, traveled over to London and then later to Italy to meet with Russians who were offering dirt on Hillary Clinton, and that in the presence of Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions, he was suggesting that he had connections with the Russian government and that he could arrange a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Took him 3 times to come off of the bullshit story that he had been telling. 3 times. Which now seems to fit with Carter Page's story. He was an individual who we interviewed, and there's now a public transcript, also on that foreign policy team. He was a senior foreign policy advisor, just like George Papadopoulos. And again, it just baffles me why so many foreign policy advisors on a presidential campaign are leaving the place where you can get votes, the United States, and traveling abroad. But in our interview, Carter Page told us the same thing. It was a 7.5-hour interview. And you can read the transcript and see that for the first couple hours, he sticks to the same story. I just went to Russia, I was interested in meeting with scholars, traveling around, I was looking for business, didn't really have a plan. But once he starts to get confronted with email production that we have from other witnesses, we learn that he told Jeff Sessions he was going to Russia after a campaign national security meeting broke up. He went over to Russia and met with energy executives and the vice prime minister of Russia. Again, imagine a Russian coming to the United States and meeting with Mike Pence. That would have to be a pretty significant person. That shows you what the Russians thought of him and his role on the campaign. That he talked with the Russians about sanctions that were in place while over there. That he talked with the Russians about the interference campaign that was taking place already at that point over here. And then after the election, he went back in December. And then went to London and met in London also with Russian bankers. And so we're starting to see that all of these denials that they've given us for the last few months only became acknowledgments when we had documents to confront them. There's one more example I'll give you, but I think you get the idea here. Don Jr. One of the centerpiece meetings that we are investigating is a June 9th meeting at Trump Tower with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort. To set up that meeting, an email was sent where the subject line was Clinton, Russia, private, confidential. What's fascinating to me as a lawyer is Jared Kushner, the day he was interviewed by our committee, put out a statement saying he didn't read that email. And I don't think there's a more clickbait type email that anyone would read, even if you were in the Clinton family, then Clinton, Russia, private and confidential. But when I said that there was a deep willingness and eagerness to meet, to work with them, it was Don Jr.'s own words, his own admission in the email, which was offering dirt on Hillary Clinton if he would meet with Russian nationals. And he said in the email, I love it and cannot wait until the fall, demonstrating a willingness to receive and even an acknowledgement that it would be more politically beneficial to take it in the fall. And so, again, when I step back and wonder, are we just chasing coincidences and innocent explanations here? I think foreign adversary, presidential election, I promised you in 2008, David Axelrod and David Plouffe and Valerie Jarrett, the brains behind the Obama administration, weren't meeting with not only Russians, but Brits or Mexicans or Australians. No one has time in a presidential campaign to meet with those folks because they're not worth anything to you. You need votes and support here in the United States. And that's what has struck me is just so unusual about why they would commit themselves at the highest level to take so many meetings and foreign trips with the foreign adversary unless they were willing and eager to work with them. Now, Bob Mueller and his team will be responsible for the criminal culpability. For us, the who is only relevant in the how do we protect ourselves from this happening again. And that, what do we learn from it? As you can see, it has divided the Congress. It's divided the country. But I'm confident that more and more people care about what happened. A recent poll shows that over the last 3 months, people who are concerned about the president's prior contacts with Russia have gone up from 45% to 69%. It's a growing concern because it's a relationship that affects our foreign policy and what we do and how we make decisions in the world. But I think what it's really about is what I mentioned at the beginning, our freedom to choose. Who gets to decide when we go to the ballot box? And it's the reforms that we can make around that principle that are most important to who we represent. When I was a 20-year-old intern for Congresswoman Costa, I was on Capitol Hill for the worst day of probably all of our lives, September 11th. I was sent home as we fled the area, fearful of what was next, and I remember watching from my fraternity house the picture from the Capitol steps of Republicans and Democrats hand in hand singing God Bless America. And they came together. And they did everything they could over the next few years to put in place reforms to keep us safer from terrorism. I've only met Bob Mueller once in my life. He spoke at the orientation for new members of Congress in 2012. And I didn't have a question for him. I just stood up and I thanked him. And I said, "You've been in this job now for 11 years, and we haven't had a major attack on our soil." I made him very nervous. But the point that I was trying to make was that that's not easy. And that took a lot of good minds and divided minds to come together. And one thing that I was inspired by was that they created an independent commission. What gives me hope is that commission was not created on September 12th. It was created in November of 2002. Over a year went by after the attack before a commission was created to address it. There was a year of partisanship and finger pointing, and it wasn't pretty. But after that commission was created, for years they sought to understand how an entity could do this, who was responsible, what was the government response, why was it so inadequate, and what reforms are necessary so it doesn't happen again. And I think you would all agree that we are safer in the skies today and we are freer from terrorism today because of the work that that commission did and how the lawmakers came together to put them into place. So I wrote legislation a couple weeks after the November 8th election last year. Not foreseeing that it would be this ugly, but learning from a 20-year-old who saw this commission come together after September 11th. I called for an independent commission to take it outside of Congress and to have a bipartisan, independent panel of foreign policy, national security, and election experts look at what happened. Every one of my Democratic colleagues has supported this legislation. 2 Republicans have signed on as well. We're about 22 away from what it will take. I know getting the 3rd Republican is going to be even harder than getting the 2nd one. But I really believe that when we come together like we did after September 11th, or after Pearl Harbor, or after other national tragedies where we brought together the best and brightest minds, we can reclaim the values that were attacked. And so that's what gives me hope. And so much of that has been, I would say, informed by what I learned as a lawyer. Evidence, relevancy, making a case and trying to persuade others in a system where there is no judge to rule on objections. There's only public sentiment, and trying to move the public sentiment. Because my biggest fear, frankly, is that if we do nothing, the next election is going to be much worse. It won't only be Russia, because our intelligence community has assessed that they are learning from what they did and sharpening their knives. There are other foreign adversaries and non-state actors who would love to influence our election or advance policies that are favorable to them. I still believe that my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues love our country more than they love our party and understand that this could happen to either one of us. So that motivates me every day, and I know my duty as an officer of the court is to do all I can to pursue and advance justice, whether it's for the country or for the individuals in it who are counting on us. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for inspiring me and helping me do what I do. And I promise to keep you updated, and hopefully we'll have even better news the next time we meet. Thanks so much.
Swalwell, thank you so much. He's generously offered to answer questions for the next few minutes. We have probably another 15 minutes if you'd like. If it goes dead, we'll go ahead and let him sit down and enjoy his lunch. But go ahead and if you
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm wondering, excuse me, you talked a little bit about the freedom to choose. Can you talk to us a little bit about Citizens United and what maybe you or your colleagues are trying to do about campaign finance?
The question was about Citizens United and what is being done about campaign finance. So as you probably know, the Citizens United is a Supreme Court case that said that essentially corporations, when it came to making political contributions, could be treated the same as a person, and that they could make unlimited contributions through what are called independent expenditures. I personally believe that so many of the problems that we have with gridlock is because of the outside forces on both sides that we see from money. So what I'm supporting, and there's legislation out there, to move our congressional campaigns at least to be publicly financed and have small dollar limits that would be matched by the public. Now I know that with a congressional approval rating very low, that it's very hard for the public to imagine paying for those campaigns, but I actually think that the approval rating is so low because so many people are pessimistic about who has influence and how money in politics works. Yes?
So we hear that these oligarchs in Russia were laundering their money by buying units in Trump development, and that there was an understanding between Trump and these oligarchs that this was a way they had of stashing their money here to have property overseas, and he was going to look the other way. But is there any evidence? I say, are people looking at that? Are they subpoenaing the Russians who have these, who are residents here, the Blavatniks and all these people? Are subpoenaing them to get the records that show that it was laundering of their money?
So the question was about potential laundering of money through residents at the different Trump properties. So, first, again, just to be clear, our role is, not a criminal prosecution. I hope that Bob Mueller and his team are looking at that because two people have already been indicted for multiple money laundering accounts. The president's campaign chairman was working with pro-Russian Ukrainian forces. One of them who ultimately fled to Russia to seek protection because he wasn't protected anymore in Ukraine. But then we know that money laundering is a method that the Russian intelligence services, which are connected to their oligarch patronage system that they've carried out. Now, I just want to also make it clear, I believe a lot of this is just rooted, whether there was a financial, like an illicit financial benefit or not, that Donald Trump wasn't able to get loans from most reputable bankers, and that he had Russians, whether illegally or lawfully, who were willing to invest in him. I think a lot of why he thinks so favorably of him when he talks about reducing the sanctions against Russia, or talks about diminishing the role that NATO plays, or even when he said that he can't say for sure if Russia was responsible for bringing down that Malaysian airline jet over Ukraine, where the whole world has seen the pictures and knows that they're responsible, that a lot of that is just an ego that likes Russians who like him. They like him. They've invested in him. They say nice things about him. They threw a big party for him when he came to Moscow. I think some of it is more simple than, anything that illicit. And again, that's for, you're right, the Mueller team will pursue with their own subpoenas and their own leverage. But for us, we're not bringing criminal charges. We're just trying to understand how is a foreign adversary able to draw itself so close to people, who are in power, and how do you protect against that? Yes.
Kind of a two-parter. Number one, Congress passed sanctions that are not getting implemented. What's Congress going to do about it? And number two, is anything pending to protect the integrity of the elections? So we don't have this problem.
So the first question was, Congress passed sanctions against Russia earlier this year in August, and the president was supposed to implement them by October 1st. And I believe it was October 29th, they weren't implemented for 29 days, and they finally said that they're drawing up what they would look like. We still haven't seen the full enforcement of them. And so, this is a room full of lawyers. I was talking to a friend of mine who clerked on the Supreme Court 2 weekends ago, contemplating, what is the cause of action to enforce sanctions? Who is the party that would, bring a suit against the executive branch? Is it Congress? Does Congress have standing, to enforce congressionally mandated sanctions that the executive branch is supposed to issue, against a third party? So there are some, legal questions about it that we've never had to answer before, because typically presidents, carry out the will of Congress. Now, many of you probably remember the only other case that's even similar to this is when, under George H.W. Bush, Congress had passed a law that allowed a child born in Jerusalem to have Israel placed as their place of birth on their passport. Now, as you know, it's still a question. Jerusalem is not, acknowledged. It's part of disputed territories as far as the official U.S. position. And George H.W. Bush refused to carry that out, and that's really the last, and other presidents, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton, refused to carry that out. That's really the only other time where you had an international issue passed by Congress where the president wouldn't carry it out. So there's not a lot of law in this area. Again, it comes back, I think, to the sentiment of the people. You have the power of the purse in Congress, so you can just stop funding some of the president's initiatives, but you hope it doesn't come to that. Your second question was, what reforms have we put in place? So last week we were what they call marking up in the Judiciary Committee. It's a way to refer to writing a bill and going through the amendments of the bill, a surveillance act to update our foreign surveillance. And I included an amendment in that act that would require, if our foreign surveillance observes interference efforts by another country, so basically if we have an electronic communication that observes, say, Australian A talking to Australian B saying we're going to mess with the U.S. elections, that Congress has to be immediately notified. The Gang of Eight, the 8 leaders on the intelligence committees and in Congress. And I wrote this amendment because one of the lessons we've already learned in our investigation is that Congress wasn't notified for nearly 6 months after this began, and the public wasn't notified for far much longer after that. And one of the reasons which was so disturbing when we've listened to some of the leaders in the Obama administration testify why it took them so long to tell the public, in one of the open hearings, they acknowledged that Donald Trump's claims that the election was going to be rigged factored into their decision-making, because they were afraid, I think wrongfully, that if they acknowledged that Russia was interfering or even had gone into voter registration systems, you could play into his claim, if he had lost the election, that the elections were rigged. And so I wrote that amendment to take away the political decision-making and just require that Congress be notified. And it was disappointing. It failed on a party line vote. And it didn't say anything about the last election. And it didn't say anything about a particular country. It just said, if our intelligence community hears individuals in our foreign surveillance talking about interfering in our elections, Congress has to be notified. And it just illustrates to me how far we have to go to make sure it doesn't happen again. Yes, sir, in the back.
Those of us who recall the Iran Contra affair and its investigations afterwards may recall that many players in that were able to escape responsibility later because during their testimony before congressional committees, they were granted immunity. Do you have some confidence that the House Intelligence Committee or other committees investigating this situation will be able to avoid granting immunity in that way so that there are folks who are responsible that should be held accountable?
Thank you, sir. The question was about the Iran-Contra investigation and that individuals were granted congressional immunity and whether that would occur here. So far, it has not. The only person who floated that publicly was General Flynn. My experience as a prosecutor is that you only grant immunity first if you receive a proffer as to what the person is going to tell you, that you can corroborate it in some other forms, and it's information that you would not otherwise be able to obtain. Now, I still think we should be open-minded on a case-by-case basis, but I generally am skeptical and would oppose giving that. Yes, I have time for one more. Yes.
Yeah, a question is, have you or any of your colleagues thought about addressing the accuracy of information that comes via Facebook, Twitter, etc.?
The question is whether me or any of my colleagues have thought about addressing the accuracy or veracity of posts that are put on Facebook. We had an open hearing with Facebook, Google, and Twitter a couple weeks ago, and this is what we struggle with, because I think the greatest part of our country is our freedoms of speech. That my mom can go on my Facebook page and tell me how wrong I am. Can't do anything about it. But what I think we can do is, first, the freedom of speech belongs to us, not a foreign intelligence service. And so if we do, my question to the technology companies was, now that we know, what are you willing to do to prevent this from happening again? Meaning that now that you know that another country would use your platform to try and carry out an attack, what will you do? Will you report it immediately to the FBI? And they all said yes. I said, do you agree that there should be some sort of transparency when coordinated ads are being placed, meaning that you have to report it to the Federal Elections Commission and that people have to know that who's paying for it? They did seem to agree there. So I feel like, going back and blaming the tech companies, sure, when you're getting a lot of ads in the United States paid for in rubles, that's cause for concern. But I think we were all naive. From the government to the companies to the voter. And I think now that we know, the responsibility is to do all we can to protect freedom of speech, but not to allow those platforms to be weaponized by a foreign adversary. So thank you again.